As políticas migratórias de acolhimento e integração de migrantes, o acolhimento e a proteção de refugiados e a gestão de fronteiras constituem temáticas fundamentais no nosso tempo. Também por aí passa a aprendizagem a vivermos juntos em paz, numa casa comum, em que todos possamos viver com dignidade. Para nos falar deste tema tão relevante, temos connosco o Dr. António Vitorino, Diretor-Geral da Organização Internacional das Migrações, que nos fala desde Genebra. A sua missão é da maior relevância para uma boa gestão das migrações e é uma grande honra que possa estar connosco. Seja muito bem-vindo ao nosso Ubuntu Summit.
Thank you so much, Rui, and it's a pleasure to be back to the Ubuntu world. You have asked me to give you a picture about the current situation in the world concerning migrants. Well, I'm afraid I don't have to you a rosy picture. But the key message of everything that I'm going to tell you is that we need to be very realistic in assessing the tough world we live in so that we can engage to change it. And that's what we do in IOM in the perspective of supporting migrants, refugees, and displaced people all over the world. And I think that we live in a triple crisis. First, it's an health crisis, definitely, because of the pandemic. Secondly, it is a social economic crisis, because some of the measures that are taken to fight the pandemic, and the pandemic itself, has created a difficult economic and social situation in many countries, in many places in the world, and affecting the most vulnerable, and the migrants are definitely among the most vulnerable. And the third crisis, not least, is that we live a protection crisis. There are key issues of protecting the most vulnerable, not just migrants, but even among the migrants, you have women, girls, young boys, you have disabled people who are in particularly harsh conditions. So let me just see if in 10 minutes I give you a picture. First, the health crisis. Everybody says, well, the world has come to a stop, and it is true. It has never happened in our history. We have never seen more than 110,000 restrictions of mobility worldwide. Nevertheless, there are 2 million migrants less in 2020 than in 2019. But this reduction, in terms of aggregated figures, does not give you the picture about the realities that are very uneven and very unbalanced. There are almost 3 million migrants stranded by the pandemic, by the closure of the borders, by the lockdowns. Most of them wanted to go back to their countries of origin because of the pandemic, and they just became blocked in their way. And they live in very difficult conditions because they don't have the necessary human conditions of survival, and they don't benefit from humanitarian support. But even if you look worldwide, in some regions there has been a drop in the number of people moving. It's the case of the Eastern Mediterranean, for instance. In relation to the Greek islands, there is a decrease of arrivals of around 80%. But on the contrary, there is an increase of arrivals in Italy, from Tunisia mainly, more than from Libya. And there is a new route towards Europe, to the Canary Islands, through the Atlantic, that involves Moroccan citizens and Senegalese and other Sahel citizens. So the picture is very much diverse. In some cases, there has been a slowdown. In some cases, there has been an increase. And the disturbing thing is that if people cannot move legally, they will try to move irregularly. And the criminal networks that traffic in people, abuse and exploit the human rights of migrants have been very active during the pandemic and also because of the pandemic. Second point in my message is to say, well, I believe that the pandemic has emphasized and exposed more clearly the inequalities and the vulnerabilities that we knew before the pandemic, they existed, and they have become even more harsh. Because usually migrants are the first ones to lose their jobs, especially migrant women. Secondly, because in fact, there is a need to make it clear that it is a fundamental right to guarantee to all people access to healthcare. And in some countries, migrants are not recognized to have access to universal healthcare. And this is going to be particularly important in the months ahead of us, when it comes to the time where people need to be vaccinated. Nobody has doubts, as the Secretary General Guterres has always said, nobody is safe until everybody is safe. And when I mean everybody, I'm including migrants, of course. Migrants need to be included in national vaccination plans. And this is particularly sensitive for those migrants that are in countries of destination and that are in an irregular situation, because they are afraid of getting in contact with public services. They are afraid that if they go for a universal health institution, and then they might be submitted to law enforcement decisions like deportation. It's absolutely necessary to guarantee that everybody has access to vaccination, and that states do not use the vaccination as a law enforcement instrument, and therefore people can feel confident and have trust that it's for their care that the universal vaccination is most needed. But there are other vulnerabilities that we need to take into consideration. The United Nations forecasts that roughly 100 million people will fall back into extreme poverty because of the social economic recession generated by the pandemic. This means losing almost 1 decade of progress in the Agenda 2030 in the Sustainable Development Goals. Poverty, extreme poverty, fighting extreme poverty has been a key cornerstone of the Agenda 2030. In 1.5 years, we might lose 1 decade of progress. Food insecurity is another element that we need to focus very attentively. IOM and the World Food Programme have recently published a report on food insecurity and its impacts on migration. And I think that there are a number of places in the world now where the situation of food insecurity has raised because of the pandemic. Not just Yemen, that we knew for sure, but also in countries like Ethiopia, of Democratic Republic of Congo, or in the Sahel region, or in northern Mozambique. There are very concerning signs of food insecurity, food scarcity that can degenerate in a true famine. And last but not least, UNICEF forecasts that from all girls that attended school in the developing world that stopped attending school because of the pandemic, from all those girls that were attending school, only 50% of them will go back to school once the pandemic is over. This is a terrible loss from the perspective of equality, of gender equality, of future opportunities for girls in the developing world. And this represents for all those countries impacted an extreme severe loss of human capital. And all these elements, these side effects of the pandemic, need to be taken into very serious consideration when we speak about how we can build back our world better after the pandemic. Yes, there will be an after the pandemic. But unfortunately, we must recognize that access to this post-pandemic world will be also very uneven worldwide, because 80% of the vaccines that have been distributed and rolled out are in the global north. Only 20% are in the global south, which means that in the best forecast, we will arrive to the end of this year, 2021, with 20% of the world population vaccinated. But those 20% will be mainly in the global north. So we have to anticipate that access to the economic recovery that is badly needed will be extremely uneven worldwide, and that, of course, this will create new challenges for countries that are struggling to develop themselves amid a very serious health situation, especially in Southeast Asia, in Africa, or also in Latin America. And last but not least, the protection side. I must say that we have come to the conclusion in the UN system that during the 90s, the humanitarian crisis, mainly due to conflicts or to poverty or to community tensions, had a duration of at average 5 years. Unfortunately, in the 21st century, we have come to the conclusion that those protracted crises that last, are on average have a duration of 10 years. And this has an enormous impact on the humanitarian support needs of millions and millions of people all around the world. And if you look to the global humanitarian outlook that is published by the United Nations, you will come to the conclusion that last year, in 2020, all the needs in terms of humanitarian assistance, food, water, hygienic instruments, shelter, and so on, all those needs were met by the donor community at the average of 56 up to 60%. When we assess the current year, 2021, we have come to the conclusion that humanitarian needs worldwide will be on the rise by 40%. If you join this reality, the needs assessment, with the fact that even donor countries are confronted with economic recessions, with economic slowdown, with economic downturns, of course, it will be much more difficult in 2021 to find the funding needed to address humanitarian needs that are on the rise 40% in comparison to last year, when last year we only got the capacity to respond to the needs of the people at average 60%. So we might be confronted with a very serious and very disturbing humanitarian situation during this year, not just because of the crises that we have known in the past, Syria being one of them, the Rohingya refugees in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, another one, or the situation in Libya, or the 5.5 million displaced Venezuelans in all Latin America. But we are now confronted with new crises, like the disruption in the Tigray region in Ethiopia, or unfortunately, very recently, the terrible humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip. So when we look to this crisis and to this humanitarian landscape, we definitely need to engage in supporting those who are in need, engage in making a difference. And the difference can be made by each one of us. It's not necessary to be at the head of an international organization like IOM. The difference is made on the direct relationship with the people that are in need, whether through volunteer work, whether through NGOs, whether through advocacy of some basic principles of human rights, equality, mutual respect, and protecting and supporting the most vulnerable. That's it. This was my message in 11 minutes, as Rui Marques has asked me, and it was a pleasure to be back to the Ubuntu family. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. António Vitorino. You are part of the Ubuntu family, of course, and thank you so much. We wish you a continuation of good mission in the IOM work, very, very tough mission. And thank you so much. Um grande abraço desde Lisboa até Genebra. Muito obrigado por ter estado connosco.